CEOs of Apple, Amazon, Google, and Facebook, the four of America's richest tech CEOs, faced the House of Representatives Antitrust Subcommittee on Wednesday with concerns over violations of antitrust laws. The series of investigations started last July, and shares of the big tech companies fell when news hit that the US government was investigating these four companies on anti-competitive practices. This hearing was a significant event because depending on how the CEOs respond to the grilling questions, it could determine whether the government will force these companies to be broken up. And so today, I wanted to highlight some clips during the hearing. Hope you guys enjoy.
Mr. Bezos, in July 2019, your employee, Nate Sutton, told me under oath in this committee that Amazon does not, quote, use any specific seller data when creating its own private brand product. So let me ask you, Mr. Bezos, does Amazon ever access and use third-party seller data when making business decisions? And just a yes or no will suffice, sir.
I thank you for the question. I know it's an important topic, and I also want to thank you for representing us. I can't answer that question yes or no. What I can tell you is we have a policy against using seller-specific data to aid our private label business, but I can't guarantee you that that policy has never been violated.
Mr. Bezos, you're probably aware that an April 2020 report in the Wall Street Journal revealed that your company does access data on third-party sellers, both by reviewing data on popular individual sellers and products and by creating tiny product categories that allowed your company to categorically access detailed seller information in a supposedly aggregate category. Do you deny that report?
I'm familiar with the Wall Street Journal article that you're talking about, and we continue to look into that very carefully. I'm not yet satisfied that we've gotten to the bottom of it, and we're going to keep looking at it.
Okay.
It's not as easy to do as you would think because some of the sources in the article are anonymous, but we continue to look into it.
I'll take that as you're not denying that, you're looking into it. I will tell you a former Amazon employee in third-party sales and recruitment told this committee, quote, there's a rule, but there's nobody enforcing or spot checking. They just say, don't help yourself to the data. It's a candy shop. Everyone can have access to anything they want. Do category managers have access to non-public data about third-party products and businesses?
Here's what I can tell you. We do have certain safeguards in place. We train people on the policy. We expect people to follow that policy the same way we would any other. It's a voluntary policy. As far as I'm aware, no other retailer limits their use of data at all.
There's no actual enforcement. There's no actual enforcement of that policy. So it's voluntary and there's no actual enforcement. So maybe that answers my...
Sorry. No, I think I may have misspoke. I'm trying to say that the fact that we have such a policy is voluntary. I think no other retailer even has such a policy.
Well,
our
that's
enforcement of that policy. We would treat that like any internal policy, and if we found that someone violated it, we would take action against them.
Mr. Zuckerberg, you have written that Facebook can likely always just buy any competitive startups. In fact, on the day Facebook bought Instagram, which you described as a threat, you wrote, quote, one thing about startups is you can often acquire them, close quote. Mr. Zuckerberg, you were referring to companies like Instagram in that quote, weren't you?
I've always been clear that we viewed Instagram both as a competitor and as a complement to our services. In the growing space around, after smartphones started getting big, and they competed with us in the space of mobile cameras and mobile photo sharing. But at the time, almost no one thought of them as a general social network. And people didn't think of them as competing with us in that space. And, I think that the acquisition has been wildly successful. We were able to by acquiring them, continue investing in it and growing it as a standalone brand that now reaches many more people than I think either Kevin, the co-founder, or I thought would be possible at the time.
In early 2012, when Facebook contemplated acquiring Instagram, a competitive startup, you told your CFO that though nascent, Instagram could be very disruptive to us. And in the weeks leading up to the deal, you described Instagram as a threat, saying that, quote, Instagram can meaningfully hurt us without becoming a huge business.
At the time, there was a small but growing field of
Did you mean
mobile.
that? Did you mean that consumers might switch from Facebook to Instagram? That was my question.
Thanks, Congressman.
Yes or no? Did you mean that?
In the space of mobile photos and camera apps, which was growing, they were a competitor. I've been clear about that. I've been clear that Instagram was a competitor in the space of mobile photo sharing, and by having them join us, they certainly went from being a competitor in the space of being a mobile camera to an app that we could help grow.
Mergers and acquisitions that buy off potential competitive threats violate the antitrust laws. In your own words, you purchased Instagram to neutralize a competitive threat. If this was an illegal merger at the time of the transaction, why shouldn't Instagram now be broken off into a separate company?
I think the FTC had all of these documents and reviewed this and unanimously voted at the time not to challenge the acquisition. The acquisition has done wildly well, largely because not just of the founders' talent, but because we invested heavily in building up the infrastructure and promoting it and working on security and working on a lot of things around this. And I think that this has been an American success story.
Well, thank you. Mr. Zuckerberg, you're making my point. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I want to end where I began. Facebook, by Mr. Zuckerberg's own admission and by the documents we have from the time, Facebook saw Instagram as a threat that could potentially siphon business away from Facebook. And so rather than compete with it, Facebook bought it. This is exactly the type of anti-competitive acquisition that the antitrust laws were designed to prevent. This should never have happened in the first place. It should never have been permitted to happen.
Companies appearing before us today, that it's not just harmful to our economy and competition, but it's harmful to the founding principles of our democracy. Facebook and Google are designed to keep users on their platforms, whatever the cost. Because disinformation, propaganda, and hateful speech are good for engagement, they're good for business. But over 100 years ago, the Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. wrote, "The most stringent protection of free speech would not protect a man in falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing panic." My first question is, Mr. Zuckerberg, do you agree with that principle, that there are limits to harmful and false speech, and that are particularly important when it comes to the health and safety of the public?
Congressman, I certainly do, and I actually think that our policies go further than just limiting those types of things.
Well, Mr. Zuckerberg, you have 1 billion users and almost 50,000 employees, and so you agree you have a responsibility to remove harmful lies from your platform, correct?
Congressman, I think we have a responsibility to limit the spread of content that's going to be harmful for people. And also, if you, I'd like to add that I do not believe that we have any incentive to have this content on our service. People don't like it.
Except that, Mr. Zuckerberg, with all due respect, except that it is often the most engaging. It's the most, it brings the most likes, or it brings the most activity, which of course produces great profit. So you do have an incentive. The more engagement there is, the more money you make on advertising. So let me ask you a question. Let me give you some specific examples that will illustrate my concerns. These are some of the top 10 most shared articles on Facebook in 2020. Trump suggests injection of disinfectant to beat coronavirus and clean the lungs. Coronavirus hype, biggest political hoax in history. U.S. hospitals getting paid more to label cause of death as coronavirus. During the greatest public health crisis of our lifetime, don't you agree that these articles viewed by millions on your platform will cost lives?
Congressman, with respect, we certainly have policies that prohibit false information about COVID that would lead to imminent harm. And we've been quite aggressive about taking that down, as some of the questioning from the other side of the aisle has shown so far.
Well, Mr. Zuckerberg,
I'm quite proud of our efforts here.
Well, with all due respect, the problem is Facebook is profiting off and amplifying disinformation that harms others because it's profitable. This isn't a speech issue. It's about Facebook's business model that prioritizes engagement in order to keep people on Facebook's platform to serve up more advertisements. So I'll ask you very specifically, what are you doing right now to protect people from demonstrably false claims related to this deadly pandemic?
Congressman, I'll certainly answer that, but I have to disagree with the assertion that you're making that this content is somehow helpful for our business. It is not what people want to see, and we rank our what we show in feed based on what is going to be the most meaningful to people and is going to create long-term satisfaction, not what's just going to get engagement or clicks today. That's
Sir,
a common misperception about the company.
If that's true, Mr. Zuckerberg, how do you explain that on Monday, the second most popular post on Facebook was a Breitbart video claiming that you don't need a mask and hydroxychloroquine is a cure for COVID. And in the first 5 hours after being posted on Facebook, it racked up 20 million views and over 100,000 comments before Facebook acted to remove it.
Well, Congressman, a lot of people shared that, and we did take it down because it violates our policies. We work with the
After
CDC
20 million people
out.
saw it over the period of 5 hours. I mean, doesn't that suggest, Mr. Zuckerberg, that your platform is so big that even with the right policies in place, you can't contain deadly content?
Congressman, I don't think so. I think we have, on COVID misinformation in particular, a relatively good track record of fighting and taking down lots of false content, as well as putting up authoritative information. We have built a COVID information center
I understand
with
that.
authoritative information from health officials.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. I just have one more question for you.
2 billion people.
I appreciate that. Mr. Zuckerberg, if a television station runs a false political advertisement, they're held liable for that. Why should Facebook or any other platform be different? While you may not be a publisher, you're responsible maybe not for the first posting, but you then take that posting and you apply a set of algorithms that decide how you will disseminate that, which is a business decision, not a First Amendment decision. And it's hard to understand why Facebook shouldn't be responsible for those business decisions.
Congressman, in terms of political ads, we've modeled a lot of our policies off of the FCC guidelines on broadcasters and their requirements to run political ads equally from all different sides.
Mr. Bezos, you referred to third-party sellers today as Amazon's partners and that your success depends on their success. But over the past year, we've heard a completely different story. As part of this investigation, we've interviewed many small businesses, and they use the words like bullying, fear, and panic to describe their relationship with Amazon. I'm going to share the story of a small business owner who is also a wife and a mother, so you can understand how this is actually affecting the lives of everyday people and why this truly matters.
We were a top bookseller on Amazon.com, and we worked day and night very hard towards growing our business and maintaining a 5-star feedback rating. Most importantly, this business feeds a total of 14 people, which includes 3 children and one 90-year-old granny. And as we grew, we were shrinking Amazon's market share in the textbooks category. So now in retaliation, Amazon started restricting us from selling. They started with a few titles in early 2019, and within 6 months, Amazon systematically blocked us from selling the full textbook category. We haven't sold a single book from the past 10 months or probably more. We were never given a reason. Amazon didn't even provide us with a notice as to why we were being restricted. There was no warning. There was no plan.
So, Mr. Bezos, after Amazon just delisted the small business without any apparent reason or notice, she told us that they sent more than 500 separate communications to Amazon, including to you, Mr. Bezos, over the past year. There was not a single meaningful response. Do you think this is an acceptable way to treat someone that you described as both a partner and a customer?
No, Congresswoman, and I appreciate you showing me that anecdote, and I would like to talk to her. It does not at all to me seem like the right way to treat her. And I'm surprised by that. And it's not the systematic approach that we take, I can assure you. I don't even understand what's going on in that anecdote, because we would love for third-party sellers to sell books on the website.
Sir.
So I don't understand it, but I would like to understand it better. And with your permission, I would like to get in touch with your office.
I think, though, that you're missing the point. This is not just about one business. I'm concerned that this is a pattern of behavior, and basically this pattern of behavior has to change. Mr. Bezos, my question is simply, are you willing to make sure going forward that, the numerous sellers that we've talked to, they have problems just like this? And there are more sellers who have told us that they've exhausted all of their options before finally reaching out to you directly as a last resort, but they're still waiting for your response. So what do you have to say to the small businesses who are talking to Congress because you simply won't listen to them?
Well, I say that's not acceptable. If we aren't listening to you, I'm not happy about that at all. But I would, if you allow me to disagree a little bit with a piece of this, I do not think that's systematically what's going on. And the evidence that I would suggest would be useful for you to consider in that regard is that third-party sellers in aggregate are doing extremely well on Amazon. They grew from 20 years ago it was 0, and today it's 60% of sales. Third-party sellers are growing even faster than first-party retail.
Mr. Bezos,
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You said that sellers have many other attractive options to reach customers, but that's not at all what we found in our investigation. According to eMarketer, a source Amazon cited in submissions to this committee, Amazon has nearly 7 times the market share of its closest e-commerce competitor. One seller told us that, and I quote, Amazon continues to be the only show in town. No matter how angry sellers get, they have nowhere else to go. So are you saying that these people aren't being truthful when they say that Amazon is the only game in town?
Yeah, Congresswoman, with great respect, I do disagree with that. I believe that there are a lot of options, and some of them are not even listed on that chart. I just looked at it briefly, but I didn't see some that I know of, for example. So I think there are a lot of things, and
thank
it's
you.
dynamic.
All right, thank you for that.
There are more and
Mr.
more
Bezos,
every day.
my time is short. If Amazon didn't have monopoly power over these sellers, do you think they would choose to stay in a relationship that is characterized by bullying, fear, and panic?
With all respect, Congresswoman, I do not accept the premise of your question. That is not how we operate the business.
Okay. All right.
And in fact, we work very hard to provide fantastic tools for sellers, and that's why they've been successful.
Thank you for that. Mr. Bezos, I'm going to close with giving the bookseller the opportunity to finally be heard by you.
Mr. Bezos, we increased our sales on Amazon by 5 times in the past 3 years. And we have contributed that much of proportional seller fees to Amazon. We have contributed that much to your business to 5 times. We followed all the rules that were set by you. We please, just help us in earning a livelihood. We beg you. There are 14 lives at stake. Please, please, please help us get back on track.
Mr. Bezos, our investigation.
Mr. Chairman, we have the email. There is no infringement.
It's not your time. Mr. Jordan, you do not have the time. Please be respectful of your colleague. She controls the time.
Put your mask on. Put your mask on.
Mr. Jordan.
Mr. Raskin.
Mr. Jordan.
You want to talk about masks.
Mr. Jordan, Ms. Scanlon.
Why would the Deputy Secretary of Treasury unmask Michael Flynn's name, Mr. Raskin? And what I want to know is, when someone comes after my motives for asking questions, I get a chance to respond.
The gentlelady is recognized. I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony today and my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. I also want to acknowledge the extraordinary work of our team, led by Slade Bond, Lena Kahn, Amanda Lewis, Phil Barenbrook, Anna Leinhardt, and Joe Venoy, who have done an extraordinary job throughout this investigation and in preparation for our hearing today. Today, we had the opportunity to hear from the decision makers at 4 of the most powerful companies in the world. This hearing has made one fact clear to me. These companies, as they exist today, have monopoly power. Some need to be broken up. All need to be properly regulated and held accountable. We need to ensure the antitrust laws first written more than a century ago work in the digital age. When these laws were written, the monopolists were men named Rockefeller and Carnegie. Their control of the marketplace allowed them to do whatever it took to crush independent businesses and expand their own power. Well, the names have changed, but the story is the same. Today, the men are named Zuckerberg, Cook, Pichai, and Bezos. Once again, their control of the marketplace allows them to do whatever it takes to crush independent business and expand their own power. This must end. This subcommittee will next publish a report on the findings of our investigation. We will propose solutions to the problems before us. As a great American Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis once said, we must make our choice. We may have democracy, or we may have wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both. This concludes today's hearing. Thank you again to our witnesses for attending. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. And without objection, this hearing is adjourned.